Hi everyone, so as usual, whenever I make a video about a controversial topic, I don't want to bore you with a whole list of apologies and disclaimers. I don't want to come in here and seem as if I know the truth about whatever I am talking about. You know, like a lot of YouTube titles that are like the truth about this, and it's really just the opinion of the person, and it's not. Anyways, that's just a pet peeve of mine, but I don't want to seem as if I'm here to tell you the facts on something or whatever, or on cultural appropriation. That being said, I do feel pretty confident about my beliefs on this topic at this point because I have done some research, and also because I used to have a different opinion on this, and now I feel like I'm a little bit more nuanced in my opinion. So, whenever you see people talking about cultural appropriation and why it's wrong and why it's an issue, you'll notice that most of them they usually will refer to things like a power imbalance or a sort of double standard. There seems to be this idea that you might contribute to their oppression in some way if you wear something that belongs to their culture. For example, cornrows are seen as ghetto or are simply just kind of seen as unprofessional or generally wrong on black people, especially in like a work context, whereas they're seen as more fashion forward when they are on white people. Um, or people will sometimes talk about their experiences as children being bullied for wearing this or eating this, and now usually the discourse is something like, well, I used to be bullied as a child for wearing this or eating these kind of things, and now people will see this as trendy and now it's acceptable. That used to be kind of my opinion as well, in the sense that, for example, you should not wear things that belong to another culture if as if it's something that is inherently disrespectful or something like that. And I will tell you something, I mean, be, being bullied for wearing something as a child, something that belongs to your culture, is really unacceptable, and nobody should have to go through something like that, especially because experiences as a child will really shape you and will really affect you more as if you had them as an adult. But I don't think, when it's all said and done, that has nothing to do with whether or not people are allowed or should be allowed to wear whatever it is that you were bullied for. And of course, those double standards are also a result of those power imbalances between groups of people that Americans will often refer to. And I think that's why especially Americans find it delicate to see that some people appropriate the culture of groups that are discriminated against in the United States. Now, I think we need to ask ourselves, first of all, how does one thing lead to the other? How is the use of traditional clothing or hairstyles of another culture that aren't our own help further the oppression of that group and that culture? And this is not a rhetorical question, it's something that I really would want to know theories on, because I've never seen someone actually explain the process of like, well, because this double standard exists, then you actually worsen it by wearing this and that. I think we need that explanation of the process because it's not as evident to see how one thing affects the other when you're just wearing something like a piece of clothing or something like that, as it is when, for example, you're blatantly mocking a culture that faces oppression or discrimination in the United States, or you are associating a group or a culture with stereotypes, or you are profiting off the symbols of a culture, like the kimono trademark thing with Kim Kardashian. Let's take last year's, I think it was 2018, the Chinese prom incident on Twitter. So let me just say this one thing. There's nothing inherent in this white girl wearing a cheap out to prom that is mocking the culture or is promoting any stereotypes. We're not talking about like full on yellow face or anything. It's not even worn as a costume actually, it's just worn as a prom dress, a dress for a special occasion, which it is actually what it was meant to do. what it was meant to be for. Not originally, but its modern adaptation was meant as a special occasion dress. Now, if you're talking specifically about the pictures where they're like doing this pose or whatever, I think that's kind of weird, but apparently she was like referencing some YouTuber or something, so I don't know about that. And I want to mention this essay by Erich Hatala Matthes. He mentions another issue that arises when someone uses the concept of cultural appropriation. I will link the essay below, by the way. So, the concept of cultural appropriation has to rely on distinguishing between people who do belong to a culture, who are the insiders, and people who don't, who are the outsiders. And it's very complicated because even today we don't really have an explicit and official way to know exactly who belongs to a culture, who belongs to a certain group and who doesn't. There's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to who really does belong and who doesn't really belong to a certain group, like say Native American or LGBT and stuff like that. And we need a very specific definition of that sort of thing if we are going to judge who can wear and who can't wear things that originate in that culture. And for example, here, in the United States, someone is usually, socially speaking, considered to be Native American more or less based on their appearance and their, ancestry, their parents where they themselves were Native Americans and stuff like that. Whereas here in Mexico, it's more about a lot of people are part native technically here, but not everyone. In fact, most people would not necessarily consider themselves to be Native Americans. So a lot of people usually, in when you have to take a survey for school or something like that, when they want to ask you if you are indigenous Native American, they will ask you if you or your parents speak a Native American or indigenous language. And that's pretty interesting because it's not relying at all on your racial features, which is something that does matter in the United States. In the United States, if you seem to be Native American, you don't really have to speak a native language in order for people to consider you Native American when they look at you and you do appear to be so. That's just an example to tell you that who belongs and who doesn't belong to a culture is something that is a bit more difficult. So in order to calm this problem, the author proposes to focus less on cultural appropriation itself and more on what effects it could have on society, whether it would help to stigmatize a group or it's relatively harmless or completely harmless, really. So this is really just a simplified version of what he says. Again, you should read the essay if you're interested in that. So I think that part is especially important for this discussion because most of the time whenever you see people calling out others for cultural appropriation, they explain that there is a different reception, a different view of how things are, how things are perceived are different depending on who's wearing them, what race is wearing them, or nationality, or just generally who or what groups or cultures they wear belongs to. So it appears that the real issue of a lot of people is really the double standard itself and not the fact that someone is wearing something. I think we should focus less on those. I think we should focus more on these inequalities, these double standards, more than whether or not someone has the right to be wearing something. I do think that companies that profit that use cultural appropriation for profit, like Kim K's shapewear or Isabel Marron, the whole thing about her plagiarizing traditional Mexican clothes, which I think was like 3 years ago. So I'm not sure, but it was a couple years ago. I think those things we should really criticize because it's not like we're talking about someone just wearing a piece of clothing that they like, and not only because cultural appropriation isn't, as a conclusion of this. What we call cultural appropriation in general, or at least what Americans call it, is not something that is necessarily wrong or harmful. Obviously, it can definitely be, but also no one should have this position of telling someone that they don't have the right towards something. I know that I don't know, man. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I think that there's nothing even extreme about that position. I don't think we should tell anyone that they can't or they shouldn't have the right towards something, because that's just really strange. I mean, I know that freedom of expression comes with a price. For example, hate speech is obviously not something that I think should be covered. I mean, when you're blatantly promoting stereotypes and helping to stigmatize a culture or a group, that's obviously infringing on other people's freedom. But if you're just wearing a chipao, it's really strange to think that that is something that could fall under hate speech, which is why I think we should consider it to be a matter of freedom of expression. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Tell me what you think about this down below. Again, if you disagree, that's fine. I mean, we can have a discussion in the comments. That's perfectly fine, and I would like to have that actually. Again, I will link the essay down below, and I will have another article that I really liked. Can't quite remember the name of it, but I didn't mention it in this video, so I will just have it down below. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see each other in the next one. Bye.